The last thing my wife ever gave me wasn't a kiss or a whispered goodbye. It was a watch. A slim, platinum Patek Philippe, engraved on the back with the words, "Time gave me you." It cost 42,000 when I bought it for her on our 30th anniversary. She used to laugh at the price tag, said it was ridiculous, but she wore it every day after that. Through chemo, through hospital visits, through the quiet mornings when we both pretended she wasn't fading. The night she passed, I took it off her wrist myself, and I never intended to let it leave my house. I'm not a sentimental man by nature. I built my career from the ground up, commercial real estate in Chicago, 40 years of calculated risks and controlled emotions. I learned early that attachment makes you weak. But grief doesn't ask permission. After Margaret died, the house felt cavernous. My son Daniel moved back in temporarily. That's what he said. Him and his wife, Vanessa. Vanessa. If charm were currency, she'd be a billionaire. Perfect posture. Perfect smile. Always calling me Dad in that syrupy voice that never quite reached her eyes. She worked in luxury branding, whatever that meant. Everything about her screamed ambition polished to perfection. At first, I thought her interest in the watch was harmless curiosity. "Oh my God, that's vintage Patek," she said one evening, leaning across the dining table. "That's like an investment piece." "It's not an investment," I replied. "It's my wife's." She tilted her head slightly. "But you don't wear it." "I don't have to." That was the first time I saw it, the flicker. A small crack in her composure. Not anger. Calculation. Over the next few weeks, she brought it up casually. Always casually. "You know, Dad, pieces like that appreciate. You could liquidate it and diversify. We could use capital for a project Daniel and I are considering. You can't just let something that valuable sit in a drawer." I didn't miss the shift from you to we. One night, after Daniel had gone upstairs, she stayed behind in the kitchen. The lights were dim. The house was too quiet. "You know," she said softly, "Daniel doesn't like asking you for help. But he needs it." "For what?" I asked. She smiled again. Opportunity. I held her gaze. "If Daniel needs something, he can ask me himself." Her expression hardened just for a second. "That watch could change things for us," she said. "For you?" I corrected. She stood up straighter. "It's not doing anyone any good locked away." I felt something settle inside me then. Not anger, instinct. "You're right," I said calmly. "It's not doing anyone any good." Her eyes lit up. "But it's not for sale." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was loaded. That was the moment I understood something important about my daughter-in-law. She didn't see the watch as a memory. She saw it as leverage. And I had just refused her. I didn't know it yet. But that single word, no, would cost me far more than 42,000. Because some people don't accept denial. They retaliate. And when they do, they don't knock on the front door. They let themselves in. The day the watch disappeared, I knew before I even opened the safe. You don't spend 40 years in high-stakes negotiations without developing instincts. Something was off the moment I walked into my bedroom. The air felt disturbed, like a room that had been recently occupied but was trying to pretend otherwise. The safe was hidden behind a framed photograph of Margaret and me in Santorini. I slid the painting aside and stared at the keypad. No scratches. No forced entry. I punched in the code. The door clicked open. Empty. For a moment my mind refused to process it. I checked the velvet compartment twice, then a third time, as if grief had made me forgetful. But it wasn't grief. It was theft. The watch was gone. $42,000 in platinum and memory gone. My first instinct wasn't rage. It was clarity. There were only 3 people in that house who knew about the safe: me, Daniel, and Vanessa. I walked downstairs slowly, deliberately. Vanessa was at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone. Daniel sat beside her, distracted, sipping coffee. "Morning, Dad," she said sweetly. "You're up early." "I had trouble sleeping," I replied evenly. Daniel glanced up. "Everything okay?" I looked at him carefully. My son had always worn his emotions openly. If he were involved, I'd see it. "I checked the safe this morning," I said. Vanessa didn't look up immediately, just half a second too late. "And?" she asked casually. "The watch is gone." Daniel froze. "What? That's impossible." Vanessa finally met my eyes. Calm, controlled, perfectly rehearsed confusion. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. "Maybe you moved it." I held her gaze. "I don't misplace my late wife's belongings." Silence. Daniel stood up. "Dad, that's insane. No one here would what?" I interrupted. "Steal from you," he said firmly. Vanessa reached for his arm. Let's not jump to conclusions, she murmured. Maybe someone broke in. There's no sign of forced entry, I replied. And the security system shows no breach. Her jaw tightened just barely. Well, she said after a pause, you can't possibly be implying. I'm not implying anything, I said calmly. I'm stating a fact. The watch is missing, and only family knew where it was. The word family hung heavy in the air. Daniel looked hurt. Dad, we would never? I didn't say you did, I said. But I let my eyes drift intentionally to Vanessa. For the first time since I'd known her, her composure cracked. Not dramatically, just enough. A flash of indignation. That's offensive, she said coldly. After everything we've done to help you. Help me. An interesting choice of words. You moved into my house, I replied evenly. Let's be clear about who is helping whom. Daniel exhaled sharply. This is getting out of hand. Is it? I asked. Vanessa stood up. If you're accusing me, say it. I stepped closer, not aggressive, just deliberate. I don't accuse without proof, I said quietly. But I will be filing a police report. That landed. Daniel's face drained of color. Vanessa's fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. Police, Daniel repeated. Dad, that's extreme. Is it? I said. $42,000. Sentimental value. A felony. Vanessa's voice lowered. You would humiliate your own son over a watch. It's not about the watch, I said. And that was the truth. It was about betrayal. Because here's what most people misunderstand about theft. It's not the loss of the object. It's the violation. The realization that someone you fed at your table calculated your blind spots. I watched Vanessa carefully. She wasn't panicking. She was recalibrating. That told me everything. By noon, Daniel was pleading with me to give it time. Vanessa had retreated to the guest room, claiming she felt attacked. But I wasn't confused anymore. This wasn't desperation. This was entitlement. And I had just threatened to disrupt whatever plan she had set in motion. What she didn't know was that I'd built my life around contingencies. And if she thought I was just an aging widower clinging to a memory, she was about to learn how wrong she was. I didn't confront her immediately. That's what she expected. When I saw the security footage, Vanessa standing outside my office at 2:17 a.m. barefoot in silk pajamas, glancing over her shoulder before slipping inside, I felt something colder than anger. Confirmation. But I also felt something worse, disappointment. Not in her. In my son. Because if Vanessa had crossed that line alone, it was betrayal. If Daniel knew, it was something unforgivable. I replayed the footage 3 times. She was inside for 9 minutes. 9 minutes is an eternity when you know exactly what you're looking for. The safe code wasn't written down anywhere. I had never shared it. But I had opened it once while she was nearby. Months ago, briefly, carelessly. I remembered her standing behind me, asking about wine storage. Watching the mirror, I had underestimated her attention to detail. That mistake was mine. The next morning, Daniel knocked on my bedroom door. Dad, can we talk? I let him in. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, shoulders tense. This police thing, can we slow down? He asked. Why? I said calmly. He ran a hand through his hair. Because it's tearing the house apart. It was already torn, I replied. You just didn't see the seam. He sat down heavily in the chair across from me. Vanessa feels like you're targeting her. I'm targeting the truth. He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. You know something, I said quietly. His eyes snapped up. No. But he didn't hold my gaze. Daniel, I said, my voice steady but firm. I have footage of her entering my office at 2 in the morning. His face went pale. For how long? He whispered. 9 minutes. He swallowed hard. Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. She said she couldn't sleep. He finally muttered. She told me she went downstairs for tea. Did she mention my office? I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he said something that changed everything. She's under a lot of pressure, Dad. Pressure. That word again. What kind of pressure? I asked. He looked torn. Like a child caught between loyalty and fear. She invested in something? He said slowly. A private deal. It went bad.
Real bad.
He hesitated. 6 figures. I felt the air shift. So this isn't about opportunity, I said quietly. It's about debt. Daniel stood up, pacing now. You don't understand how these things work. I understand leverage. I interrupted. And I understand desperation. He stopped walking. She thought, if you sold the watch, it would solve everything. She thought wrong. He looked at me then, not as a businessman, not as a patriarch, but as a son asking for rescue. Can you just let it go? He asked. That question pierced deeper than any accusation. Let it go. Let go of the last physical memory of my wife. Let go of the principle. Let go of the truth. For a brief moment, just a moment, I considered it. Because revenge is heavy, and conflict with your own blood is heavier. But then I imagined Margaret's face. The way she used to squeeze my hand during chemo and say, "Promise me you won't let anyone walk over you when I'm gone." I had promised. I will not let it go, I said finally. Daniel's expression hardened, not with anger, but with fear. You're going to destroy our marriage over this, he said. No, I replied quietly. She did. He left the room without another word, and for the first time since Margaret's death, I felt truly alone. But loneliness is cleaner than betrayal. That night I sat in the dark living room and made a decision. I would not explode. I would not shout. I would not accuse. I would dismantle, piece by piece. Because if Vanessa believed she could manipulate me with guilt and emotional leverage, she had mistaken grief for weakness. And that was her second mistake. Revenge, if done properly, doesn't start with confrontation. It starts with patience. By the time the sun came up the next morning, I had already spoken to Martin Hale, an old associate who specialized in asset tracing and discrete recoveries. We'd worked together years ago when a partner tried to siphon funds through offshore accounts. Martin had a gift for finding what people thought was untraceable. Luxury watches are like fingerprints, he told me over the phone. Serial numbers, dealer networks, insurance registries. If she tries to sell it through a reputable channel, we'll see it. And if she doesn't, I asked, then she'll have to go gray market. That's riskier. And desperate people make sloppy moves. Desperate. That word fit Vanessa better every day. I didn't tell him it was my daughter-in-law. I simply gave him the model, the serial number, and one instruction. Discretion. By noon, I had my next move. I called my attorney. Not to file charges yet. To update my will. There's a particular silence that fills a room when an inheritance shifts. You can't hear it, but you can feel it like pressure before a storm. Vanessa had been counting on security, on future access, on eventual ownership. I decided she would have neither. I want everything placed into a trust, I told my attorney, with strict disbursement controls. And your son? He asked carefully. He'll receive distributions, not authority. And his wife? Nothing? There was a pause. That's decisive, he said. Correct it if I'm wrong, I replied calmly, but beneficiaries don't get to steal from the estate. The paperwork would take a week. That gave me time. At home, the atmosphere had shifted. Polite. Strained. Vanessa avoided me entirely. Daniel tried to act normal, but guilt seeps through cracks no matter how hard you plaster over them. That evening, I staged something deliberate. I left the safe slightly ajar. Empty, of course, but visible. Then I waited. Sure enough, around midnight, soft footsteps echoed down the hallway. My bedroom door creaked open a fraction. I kept my breathing steady, feigning sleep. The door to my office opened next. 2 minutes later, it closed. The following morning, Vanessa looked unsettled at breakfast. You didn't close your safe properly, she said casually, pouring coffee. I raised an eyebrow. How would you know that? Her hand froze mid-pour. I passed by your office. At midnight, she recovered quickly. I couldn't sleep. Daniel stared at his plate. I held her gaze just long enough to let the tension thicken. Thank you for your concern, I said evenly. Though there's nothing left inside to worry about. Her jaw tightened, a crack in the armor. That tiny exchange told me something critical. She was checking to see if I knew. She wasn't confident. Good. Later that afternoon, Martin called back. It hasn't surfaced publicly, he said, but I got a ping from a private broker inquiry this morning. Anonymous seller, matching specs. My pulse didn't quicken, it slowed. Location, I asked. Chicago. Of course it was. She's testing the waters, Martin continued, probably trying to gauge value without committing. Can you set a trap? I asked. A small chuckle. Already thinking like you used to. I never stopped. We devised a simple plan. An interested buyer, Martin's contact, would express serious intent, request verification, insist on meeting, face to face. If Vanessa believed she was closing a quiet sale, she would walk straight into visibility. And once documented, the leverage would shift entirely. Because here's what she hadn't calculated. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to accuse. I needed proof. And once I had it, I wouldn't just recover the watch. I would dismantle the illusion she'd built around herself, methodically, publicly, and legally. That night, I watched her from across the living room. She sat beside Daniel, scrolling her phone, her expression tense. She didn't notice me observing. Predators rarely expect patience from their prey. The meeting was set for 3 p.m. at a private showroom downtown. Vanessa thought she was walking into a discreet transaction with a wealthy collector. Instead, she was stepping into a room where every word, every movement, every lie would be documented. I didn't tell Daniel where I was going that afternoon. I simply put on my coat and said I had business to attend to. In a way, I did. Martin had arranged everything. The buyer was a retired jeweler who owed Martin a favor. Hidden cameras, audio recording, legal observer in the next office, clean, controlled. I arrived early and waited in the adjacent office, watching the live feed on a tablet. At 20:57 p.m., Vanessa walked in. She wore confidence like a tailored suit, cream blazer, hair pulled back, designer handbag. Composed, calculated. She greeted the buyer with a polite smile. "Thank you for meeting on short notice." "My pleasure." The buyer replied smoothly. "You mentioned a Payback, Philippi." She hesitated only briefly before opening her bag, and there it was, Margaret's watch. Even through the screen, I felt it hit me like a physical blow. The platinum caught the light. The engraving on the back, "Time gave me you." For a second, grief tried to drown strategy. But I stayed still. Vanessa placed it gently on the table, as if it belonged to her. "It's in excellent condition," she said. "Hardly worn." A lie so casual it almost impressed me. The buyer examined it with professional interest. "Do you have original documentation?" "No," she replied smoothly. "It was a gift. From a former relationship." Former relationship. Not mother-in-law. Not family heirloom. She had already rewritten the narrative. "And you're the rightful owner?" he asked calmly. She didn't blink. "Of course." That word echoed louder than anything else she'd said. "Of course." The buyer nodded slowly. "I'll need a signature confirming lawful ownership before proceeding." A standard step. A trap. She hesitated again, longer this time. Then she picked up the pen. That was the moment I stepped into the room. The door opened quietly behind her. "Don't sign that." Her hand froze mid-motion. The color drained from her face as she turned around. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked unprepared. "Dad," she whispered. The buyer leaned back, silent now. I walked toward the table, eyes fixed on the watch. "That's an interesting story," I said calmly. "About the former relationship." She stood abruptly. "This isn't what it looks like." "No?" I asked. "Because from here, it looks like felony possession of stolen property." Her composure shattered. "I was going to tell you," she said quickly. "I just needed leverage." "Leverage," I repeated. Daniel's word, her word, the truth. "You broke into my office," I continued evenly. "You opened my safe. You removed my late wife's property. And you attempted to sell it under false ownership." Tears welled in her eyes, but they came too fast. "I was going to pay you back." "With what?" I asked. "The money you owe." That hit. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You don't understand what kind of trouble I'm in." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I replied. "The difference is, I didn't create it." She looked around, finally noticing the subtle presence of recording equipment. The realization dawned slowly. "You set me up," she whispered. "No," I corrected. "You walked in. Silence." Heavy. Absolute. The buyer carefully slid the watch back toward me. "I believe this concludes our meeting," he said politely. Vanessa's breathing was uneven now, panic replacing performance. "You can't do this," she said quietly. "Daniel will never forgive you." I looked at her not with anger, with clarity. "This stopped being about forgiveness the moment you chose theft over honesty." I picked up the watch. For the first time since it disappeared, I held it again. Cold, solid, real. And so was the proof. I didn't respond to her threat. I simply walked out of the showroom with the watch in my pocket, and the evidence secured in Martin's possession. But her words followed me all the way home. "It will destroy your son too." That wasn't fear talking. That was strategy. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had already made a decision. This confrontation would happen once. Clean, direct. No theatrics. When I stepped inside, Daniel was pacing in the living room. "She called me," he said immediately. "She said you humiliated her." I corrected her. I replied calmly, removing my coat. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" I placed the watch on the coffee table between us. Daniel stared at it like it was a ghost. "She tried to sell it," I said. "Today. Signed statement of ownership pending." His face went pale. "You're lying." "I have video." Silence. Vanessa entered from the hallway then. Her eyes were red, but not from crying, from calculation. "You ambushed me?" she said sharply.
"You staged the whole thing."
"You stole from me," I replied. "I borrowed it."
"You forged ownership?"
"I was desperate."
The word exploded out of her. Daniel turned toward her slowly. Desperate for what? She hesitated. And that hesitation was louder than any confession. "For the investment," I said evenly. "The one that lost 6 figures." Daniel's head snapped toward me. "You told him." "No," I replied. "You did. 3 nights ago." Vanessa's mask fell completely. "You promised you wouldn't," she began. "You promised you wouldn't touch it," I interrupted. The room felt smaller now, tighter. Daniel looked between us like a man realizing he'd built his house on sand. "Is it true?" he asked her quietly. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she shifted tactics. "You think your father cares about us?" she said, voice trembling. "He cares about control, about money. That watch is worth more to him than we are." That accusation cut deeper than I expected. But I didn't raise my voice. "The watch is not about money," I said calmly. "It's about integrity." Vanessa laughed bitterly. "Integrity? You're threatening to press charges against your own family. You stopped being family when you broke into my safe." Daniel stepped back like he'd been struck. "You broke into the safe," he whispered.
"She rushed toward him. I did it for us. We were drowning. You said he'd never help."
I felt something shift. "Is that true?" I asked Daniel. He looked at the floor. "I didn't think you would," he admitted softly. There it was. Not just greed. Resentment. Years of it, perhaps. Vanessa seized the moment. "See, this isn't about theft. It's about pride. You'd rather watch us fail than loosen your grip." I walked to my desk and retrieved a folder. Inside were copies of the revised trust documents. "I was prepared to support you," I said quietly. "But support requires honesty, not manipulation." I handed the papers to Daniel. "What is this?" he asked. "My estate restructuring." Vanessa's breathing quickened. "What did you do?" "I protected it." Daniel flipped through the pages, confusion turning to shock. "She's removed," he said faintly.
"Yes."
Vanessa's voice dropped to a whisper.
"You can't do that."
"I already have." The silence that followed was absolute. "No police report," I continued. "On one condition." They both looked at me. "You move out. Immediately. And you repay every dollar of the appraisal fee and recovery costs." Vanessa's eyes burned. "You're blackmailing us." "No," I said evenly. "I'm offering consequences instead of prison." Daniel looked like he might collapse. "You'd throw us out?" he asked. "I would remove the threat from my home." Vanessa stepped closer, her voice venomous now. "You think you've won," she said quietly. "But you've just destroyed your relationship with your son." I met her gaze without flinching. "No," I replied. "You did that the moment you decided I was easier to steal from than to ask." Daniel didn't argue. That was what hurt the most. The house was silent after they left. Not the hollow silence of grief. A different kind. The silence of aftermath. Their car disappeared down the street just after midnight. Daniel didn't look back. Vanessa did. She didn't wave. She didn't cry. She stared at the house like someone memorizing a battlefield. I locked the door slowly. 40 years of business taught me something simple. When someone says this isn't over, believe them. The next morning, the consequences began. At 8:12 a.m., I received a call from one of my senior property managers. "Sir, there's been a complaint filed against you." "A complaint?" I asked calmly. "Yes. Allegations of financial coercion and emotional abuse toward a family member." I closed my eyes briefly. Predictable. Filed by whom? There was a pause. Vanessa Carter, of course. By noon, an email arrived from a legal aid organization requesting a response to claims that I had manipulated inheritance promises to exert control and threatened false criminal charges. False. The irony almost made me laugh. She wasn't retaliating emotionally. She was retaliating strategically. If she couldn't access my assets directly, she would attempt to damage my reputation professionally and socially. Paint me as a vindictive patriarch weaponizing wealth. And in today's world, perception spreads faster than truth. I called my attorney immediately. "She's escalating," he said after reviewing the complaint. "But this is thin. Very thin." "I have recordings," I reminded him. "Yes," he replied. "And those recordings are nuclear. The question is whether you want to detonate them." That was the dilemma. If I released the footage, it would clear my name instantly. But it would also permanently stain Daniel's life. Employers Google. Banks investigate. Social circles whisper. Collateral damage is never as clean as we imagine. By mid-afternoon, Daniel called. I let it ring twice before answering. Dad, what did you do? He demanded. I defended myself. I replied evenly. Your wife filed a complaint. She said you're threatening her. She attempted to sell stolen property. Silence. She's scared, he said quietly. Of consequences. Of losing everything. I inhaled slowly. She already lost something more valuable than money, I said. She lost credibility. You don't understand, Daniel whispered. The people she owes, they're not patient. That caught my attention. What people? I asked. He hesitated. Private lenders, he admitted. High interest. Short terms. Now the picture sharpened. This wasn't just debt. This was pressure. External pressure. Suddenly her desperation made sense, not justified but contextualized. Has anyone contacted you? I asked. Yes, he said faintly. I felt something heavy settle in my chest. This was no longer a domestic dispute. This was exposure. Vanessa's threat, this isn't over, wasn't just about me. It was about survival. I need to know something, Daniel said carefully. If this goes public, are you really prepared to destroy us? The question lingered between us. Destroy. Such a dramatic word. I didn't start this, I said quietly. But I will finish it. After we hung up, I sat alone in my study. Margaret's watch rested on the desk in front of me. I thought about leverage, about power, about the thin line between justice and vengeance. Vanessa had tried to corner me. Then she tried to smear me. Now external forces were pressing in, and the recordings in Martin's possession were still unreleased. Proof is power. But power carries weight. If I pulled the trigger publicly, there would be no reconciliation, no repair, no path back for Daniel. But if I stayed silent, she would continue to manipulate the narrative. For the first time since this began, I felt something close to doubt. Not about her guilt. About the cost of victory. The black SUV sat outside my gate for exactly 11 minutes. Long enough to send a message. Not long enough to break a law. I watched from the upstairs window, lights off, Margaret's watch heavy in my palm. 2 men inside, engine idling. No attempt to enter, just presence, pressure. By morning, I had made my decision. Revenge is satisfying in theory, clean in imagination, but reality is layered. There were lenders involved now. Desperation backed by people who don't file polite complaint. This was no longer about humiliation. It was about containment. I called Daniel. Come alone, I said. No, Vanessa. He arrived an hour later. He looked thinner, older. Fear does that quickly. They're escalating, he admitted before sitting down. They think she has access to money. She doesn't, I replied. That's the problem. I let the silence settle. I can end this, I said calmly, his head lifted. How? I pay the debt. His eyes widened. After everything? Yes. But listen carefully. I leaned forward. This will not be a gift. It will be a contract. I laid out the terms plainly. Full written confession from Vanessa admitting theft and attempted sale. Withdrawal of all complaints filed against me. Legally binding separation of financial control. She would have no claim to my estate now or ever. Daniel enters financial counseling and relinquishes joint access to high-risk investments. And if she refuses, he asked. Then the recordings go public, along with the signed attempted sale document. He swallowed hard. She'll say you're blackmailing her. No, I corrected. I'm offering resolution. He stared at the watch on the table. You still love her, don't you? He asked quietly. I looked down at it. I love what she represented, I said. Time, loyalty, promise. Daniel's voice cracked. I didn't know how bad it had gotten. You knew enough, I replied gently. You just hoped I'd fix it without seeing it. He nodded, ashamed. That afternoon, Vanessa arrived. Alone, her confidence was gone. Not replaced with humility, just exhaustion. I slid the printed agreement across the table. You're cornering me, she said flatly. You cornered yourself, I replied. She read every line. Her jaw tightened at the confession clause. You want me to admit I stole it? Yes. And if I don't? I release everything. For a long moment she stared at me, not with hatred, but with realization. She had miscalculated. She had assumed grief made me fragile. She had assumed pride made me predictable. She had assumed silence meant weakness. Finally, she picked up the pen. The signature was slower this time. Real, binding. Within a week, the debt was settled, quietly, directly. The lenders vanished as quickly as they had appeared. The complaints were withdrawn. The narrative died before it could spread. Daniel moved into a small apartment across town. Vanessa did not move with him. I haven't spoken to her since. Sometimes late at night I sit alone with Margaret's watch resting beside me. I won, but victory feels different at this age. It isn't loud. It isn't triumphant. It's measured. I protected her memory. I protected my name. But I lost the illusion that family automatically means loyalty. And perhaps that was the real lesson. Because here's what I understand now. Greed doesn't just steal objects. It steals trust. And once trust is gone, you can negotiate repayment, but you can never fully recover what was broken. Final reflection: moral. Revenge should never be about destruction. It should be about boundaries. When you enforce them calmly and decisively, you don't just reclaim what was taken, you redefine what will never be tolerated again.